It was a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind where the rain hangs in the air like a soft curtain, muting the sounds of the city. I had ducked into a small cozy cafe to escape the drizzle, seeking nothing more than a warm cup of coffee and a few minutes of solitude. The smell of fresh coffee beans mixed with the faint aroma of wet pavement created a comforting bubble around me. I had my laptop open pretending to work, but I was scrolling aimlessly, lost in my thoughts. The cafe wasn't crowded. A few regulars sat in quiet corners, and soft jazz played in the background. It was ordinary, until she walked in. A small chime announced her entrance, and suddenly the air seemed to shift. She moved with a quiet grace, as if the world outside didn't exist for her. Rain-damp hair clung to her cheeks, and her coat was slightly wet at the hem. She scanned the cafe, then glanced toward me. And she smiled. It was a tiny, fleeting smile, nothing dramatic, just a curve of her lips, but it struck me like a bolt. My hands froze over the keyboard. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know her, hadn't even exchanged a word. And yet, in that instant, something inside me changed. I watched as she approached the counter, ordered her coffee in a soft voice, and then looked around for a place to sit. She didn't notice me anymore, but I couldn't stop noticing her. Every detail was etched in my mind. The way she brushed hair from her face, the subtle way her fingers tapped the edge of the counter, the gentle hum of a tune she sang to herself. I wanted to say something. Anything. Hi. Nice to meet you. Do you come here often? Every line sounded cliched, every thought inadequate. I sipped my coffee, pretending to type, all the while watching her find a seat by the window. She sat down, opened her notebook, and for a few moments the world felt suspended. Outside, the rain fell steadily. The gray city muted around us, and inside, there was a calm that only her presence could bring. Minutes passed. She took out a pen, scribbled something, then looked out the window again. And just as suddenly as she had arrived, she got up, grabbed her bag, and left. I stayed there, stunned, my untouched coffee growing cold. That smile, brief, shy, unassuming, lingered in my mind, brighter than the sunlight that might have broken through the clouds. I didn't know her name, didn't know how I would ever see her again, but I knew one thing. My life had shifted ever so slightly, in a way I couldn't yet explain. And as I stepped back into the rain, I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, sometimes, life gives you a glimpse of something extraordinary in the most ordinary places. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I decided to take my usual walk through the small park near my apartment. The rain had passed overnight, leaving puddles that reflected the soft morning light. I loved these early hours when the world felt still, and everything seemed possible. As I walked along the familiar path, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper tucked under a park bench. Curiosity made me pause. It wasn't unusual for people to leave notes or forgotten books here, but this one had a delicate handwriting that immediately drew me in. I hesitated for a moment. Should I leave it, or should I peek? In a rush of curiosity, I unfolded it. My dearest, I hope you find your happiness, even if I am not there to give it to you. I will love you always. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I had no idea who had written them, or for whom, but I could feel the raw emotion behind every line. I read it again slowly, savoring the fragility of hope and love intertwined. For a moment, I imagined the story behind the letter. Two people who once loved, separated by fate or circumstance, unable to be together. And yet, even in absence, love persisted. I tucked the letter carefully into my pocket. It was a reminder that sometimes, love exists quietly, in corners we don't expect, and sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks on our hearts. As I continued my walk, I wondered if someday, someone would leave a note for me, carrying the same kind of tender honesty. And for the rest of that morning, the letter stayed with me, not as a story about strangers, but as a feeling, a pulse of warmth that lingered long after I had put it back in my bag. The rain returned that afternoon, heavier than I had expected. I dashed across the street, my coat soaked and shoes squishing in puddles. It was one of those moments where the world felt chaotic and yet strangely alive. I noticed her instantly. She was struggling with a broken umbrella, trying to keep herself dry while laughing at the absurdity of the situation. Without thinking, I ran over and offered her my umbrella. "Thank you," she said, her eyes bright despite the rain dripping from her hair. We didn't exchange names. There was no grand declaration, no reason for this brief connection, but something in that shared moment made it linger in my mind. We walked together for a few blocks side by side, letting the rain soak our shoes and laughter fill the air. By the time we parted, she had vanished into the crowd, leaving only the memory of her smile behind. Sometimes a stranger can leave a mark deeper than someone you've known for years. I often find that love doesn't always need words. One evening on a quiet rooftop overlooking the city lights, she sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for several minutes, yet the air was thick with understanding. Her eyes told stories I couldn't articulate. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, and the simple contact sent shivers through me. There was hesitation, yes, but also a quiet admission. Feelings existed even without speech. Sometimes love manifests not in confession but in silence. That night I realized I didn't need to hear the words, "I love you," to know that she felt it too. At the bookstore, I made the mistake of calling her by the wrong name. "Oh," she laughed, her voice warm and musical. "Not even close." I felt my cheeks burn, embarrassed, but her laughter was infectious. She didn't scold me. She didn't make me feel small. Instead, she offered her hand, playful yet forgiving. Mistakes can sometimes create the most memorable moments. I laughed too, and in that shared chuckle a bond deepened. A crowded train, the hum of engines and chatter filling the space. I barely noticed the press of bodies around me until I saw her across the aisle. Our eyes met, and she smiled, a small gesture that made the entire train vanish in my perception. Hands brushed once, fleeting, and yet electrifying. In that brief connection, there was intimacy, recognition, and the promise of something unspoken. By the time she got off, I knew I would replay that moment for weeks to come. I had forgotten her birthday. When she mentioned it casually, I felt my heart drop. But instead of anger or disappointment, she simply handed me a small chocolate with a note. "Next year, try to remember." Love is not always in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in forgiveness, patience, and tiny reminders that someone cares even when you falter. Walking through the city at night, lights reflected in the puddles and neon signs danced on wet asphalt. We wandered aimlessly, laughing, talking, sharing stories of childhood and dreams, feeling like we were alone even in the bustling streets. Those moments, fleeting and ordinary, became extraordinary in our shared perspective. No promises, no plans, just the joy of two people fully present with each other. I wrote a letter once, pouring out everything I couldn't say aloud. The fear of rejection held me back, and I never sent it. Yet the act of writing was cathartic. Folding the paper, placing it carefully in my drawer, I realized love can exist quietly, privately, without needing acknowledgement or reciprocation. Sometimes the heart carries its own stories enough to sustain it. Finally, one evening, she stayed until sunset. We watched the horizon bleed pink and gold, the last rays of light spilling over the buildings. No words were needed. In that quiet, shared moment, I understood that all the fleeting encounters, missed chances, letters unsent, and smiles exchanged had led to this. Her hand found mine, and for the first time, everything made sense. The world, with all its chaos and unpredictability, felt perfectly aligned. As darkness crept over the city, I whispered softly, "This is what it feels like forever." And in her smile, I saw the same reflection of peace, love, and home that I felt. At last, every lost letter, every rainy encounter, every silent confession had converged into this single perfect moment.